All right, welcome back. In this video, I want to make this basic arithmetic app. So it's not going to be anything. I would say this is just for probably if you still don't understand how all these things come together. This is for beginners, if you will, people who are trying to think about how this application, how you can think through solving problems that has to do with designing application or developing an application. So this is going to be a very, very basic arithmetic app. And like I said, the essence of this video is just to show you how to think about solving problems. So it's not more about solving the problem for you, but how do you think about solving problems? So we'll make this simple app. We'll have just two text boxes, and of course we'll have one output box, and then we'll have four different buttons to represent the four basic arithmetic operators we have: the addition, the subtraction, the multiplication, and the division. And the goal or the idea would be for you to click on any of these buttons and it does the calculation for you. So let's go ahead and do the design. Of course, that has to be the first thing. This screen, just for the sake of it, I'm just going to call it home screen. And let's go ahead and have some elements here. And this I'm going to call enter first number. Enter the first number. Enter the first number. Now up here, let's go ahead and just probably just make this a little bit fancy. So let's see what we can have there. Let's just have a label box here and say arithmetizer. It doesn't exist, right? Let's see. Then let's increase the font. Let's increase the font size to, yeah, eventually I'm going to move these here. Okay, so now that we have that set, now that we have this set, we can go ahead and just duplicate this text box. I'm going to click on that text box and I will duplicate the text box right here. So once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and, of course, I need to change this to enter the second number. And like I said, this is a very basic application, and this is just for people who might be struggling with understanding how to think about solving problems. And we should have four different buttons. One would be just this sign that says plus. And I'm going to shrink this a bit, and I will duplicate that. Here I'm going to have subtraction. I'm going to duplicate that, and here I'm going to have multiplication, and I'll duplicate that again, and finally would have division. So right here, let's have division. Let me try to make these a little bit nicely fitted together. All right, so finally we have division. All right, and then down here we want to have a label, and that would be our output. So here on this one, I'm just going to call this result. And that's not where we'll put our result. That's just a label for us to say, okay, this is going to be the result of your calculation. And we'll have one more label that then does the actual result for us. So it doesn't have to be this wide, but let's just keep it that way. I'm going to increase the font size to something maybe like 30. Okay. And let's go ahead and let's center these. What else can we do here? Let's go ahead and change the, let's change this to probably trebuchet. Let's see. I think this is probably better. All right, so now let's go ahead and I think I'm actually okay with this theme. Like I said, this is not going to be a design thing as much as how do you think through this kind of application. So like I said, this is a basic application. Let's go ahead and rename all of these elements. So we're going to call this first number text box. And let's call the second number text box. This is add button, and this is subtract button. This is multiply button, and this is going to be divide button. All right, so now we can go ahead. Well, let's just have a background here. Actually, it's just so we know that this is where the output goes, and we can make the background maybe dark. And once we have the background as dark, then what that means is we want to set the text color to white. So I'm going to choose this dark background. Then I'm going to set the text color as white. All right, let me try to run this, and I don't see that happening. So back to the design. Let me see. This is what I want to change. I want to change the text color and the background. So for now, I'm just going to leave it like as is. I'm going to change this back to black. And let's see if that renders well. All right. So let's go ahead and let's write some code now. Now, the first thing you want to think about is this. We're done with this toolbox, so we don't need that. I can collapse that. Now, first question. How many inputs do we have here? So again, these are the questions you want to ask yourself. How many inputs do we have in this application? So, or if you're confused about what that question means, it's just more like saying, what do we need to get from the users? So what do we need the users to supply? What do we need the users to provide in order to use this application? And if you notice, we have two inputs here. One is this first number and the other one is this second number, right? So let's go ahead and just say two inputs. All right, and it's good practice to have this kind of designs where you think through your application before you even start writing codes at all. So two inputs, we have first number and second number. All right, those are the two inputs we need. Now, the other question we want to ask ourselves is, what do we want to do with their input, right? Now, to answer the question of what we want to do with their input, we need to know what the buttons really mean. So for instance, this button right here is an addition button. So when we click on this button, it adds this, whatever the user supplies here, to whatever the user supplies here. All right. So again, we can't answer that question unless we know what the button is going to do. So for instance, if we had another button here that says clear, which we didn't do, we'll probably do that if there is enough time to do that. Again, I don't want this to be too lengthy, but you understand, you get the point. So what do we want to do with the input we're getting from the user? So for the add button, we want to add the input. And that would be more like saying we want to do first number plus second number. All right. Now for same thing for the subtract button. What do we want to do? We want to subtract the inputs. So that's going to be first number, and that would be first number minus second number. What other button do we have here? Or what other thing do we want to do with the input that the user supplies? We want to multiply, right? So for the multiply button, it turns out that we are multiplying. So we'll say multiply the inputs. And what this means is that we're doing first number multiplied by second number. And finally, we'll do the divide button, which is also another button we have there. And this is divide the inputs. And that would mean we're doing first number divided by second number. Now, what you've done is what we call decomposition. You're breaking down this application, this entire application, you're breaking it down just so you understand what steps to take at a time. And in case you don't know, these are comments, right? So if I run this program now, these things here, these comments, they don't do anything. So these are just for our own purpose. It could be for documentation. It could be just, just text that someone who reads this code knows about. So we know we're getting two inputs. We want to call them first number and second number. There's add button. We want to add the input. Subtract button, subtract the input. Multiply button multiplies the input. Divide button divides the input. So now the other question I want you to ask is, so here the question we asked ourselves is, what do we intend to do with the input? So here the first question we're asking is, are there inputs? Or let's say, what do we need the users to supply or to provide? The other way we can ask that is, what do we need from the user? What do we need from the users? Or what must the user do to use our application? So these are questions you want to ask. Of course, all these questions, just think of them as though they mean the same thing, right? What do we need the users to provide? We need the users to provide two inputs, right? What do we need from the users? We need two inputs from the users. What must the user do to use our application? The user must have supplied two inputs, right? First number and second number. So hopefully that makes sense. But this is the first thing. It's one of the first things you want to ask yourself. And then, what's your program doing? What's your application doing? What do you intend for your application to do? The last thing, not in all cases you have this this as the last thing, but in this case, this is a very simple application, right? So the last thing we want to ask is, what is the output going to look like? And of course, the question to this would be based on whatever we get here. But this is where I'm driving at. Now, you've broken this application down, so we can go ahead and have the input we'll get from the user. We need to store it somewhere, because in the computer memory, we need to store these values somewhere in the computer memory so that we can have access to those values. And the way we store those values is by using something called variables. And variables are just ways for us to, identify that, hey, this is what we're storing inside this particular place. So you think of that more like there's a place in the memory, we need to store a value right in there, but we need a way to identify that this is this particular place. We stored that value, and this is the one we're referring to. So because of that, we want to have two variables in this case. And for us to have variables, we say var, and we can call that first number. And now one thing I want to also call your attention to is notice how I named this variable, right? This is what we refer to as camel case. So camel case, where you have the first letter as lowercase and then all the other words that are joined together are capitalized. So if I would have something here again, camel case is sensitive. So you notice how that I capitalized the I and I capitalized the S as well. And that's because those are words broken. So this is how you want to do this. And now it's also good to note that these variables are actually indeed case sensitive. So if you do first number, it's different from doing this. So you want to make sure that you're consistent. So if you're consistent with what the convention is using camel case, that would make it easier for you to identify when you've made a mistake and or not. So we have our first number, second number, and we said, what do we want to do with these numbers? So this is going to be these are going to be two different inputs, right? Now let's go ahead. We can't just get the inputs. We can't get the inputs just yet. We can do that, right? Not that we can't do that at this time, but if we do that, our program is not going to function correctly. And what that means, and let me just quickly show you this. There's something called scope. There's global scope, there's local scope. When we define any variable here, the scope is going to be global. However, as you would soon see, you would add events, all these events now, we would add them. And when we add those events, and when we declare any variable within those events, those variables we declare within those events are referred to as local scope. So they are local scope variable, which means that they are not something that can be seen in another container. So you think of it like a container, like different containers, and you put in something in one container, and you don't get to see what you put in that container in another container. So however, if you take all these containers and you put everything and you put them all in a box and you put another thing right there, they can all be in that same container. And this is what the global scope looks like. So let me show you what I mean in actual programming. So let's say we want to get this input, all right? Now, because we're getting numbers from these users, right? We ask them to enter the first number, enter the second number. Because we're getting numbers from this user, remember I said that variables are meant to hold values, right? So because of that, we want to say first number, which we have up here, equal to the way we get that input from the user is by calling this function called get number. And now get number, as you could see from here, we have it's a function that has one parameter. And so we need to pass in an argument here. And the argument we pass in is the ID of this button. So let's get back to the design mode and let's see what the ID of that button is. So what's the ID of this button? Here, right here. First number text box. So if we get back again to the let's get back to the code, and I have a pop-up here that has blocked me from doing this. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit just so I see if this can go away. I'm back here. All right, just a little bit of distraction. So we have this first number text box, all right? And I'm not going to do anything just yet, but I just want to set this watcher. Now, one of the reasons we set watchers is just so you see what the value of that variable is as we update it. So I'm going to run this program now, and notice that what do we have? NaN. And so even if we enter anything here, it doesn't get updated, right? And that's because immediately this application runs, first number gets that number, all right? And so now and that's not what we wanted, right? Because initially there's nothing really, and that's why you see this NaN. NaN just simply means it's not a number, if you will, so not a number. So let's see how we can do this, or where should we get this input from the user. So the first thing we want to do is to add the inputs, and we'll go ahead and do that. We want that to happen when the user clicks on this button right here, right? When they click this button, that's when we want to, sum up these two numbers. Now, because there is an event that's going to occur here, so if a user clicks this button, that's when we want to add these numbers. And now notice again that the question we asked was, what do we need the users to provide? Right? Now we've specified two variables for the things we need the users to provide. But what do we want to do with these inputs? Now that's the question we asked right here, right? So let's go ahead and do something with the inputs they've supplied. To do that, we need to understand that there's something called event handling. And by event, we mean something that must take place for that thing to happen. So an example of events would be clicking this button right here. And there are other events as well. There's key press, there's key down, there's key up, there's mouse over, there's double click. There are lots of events that we can choose from. So, but it's appropriate to use this plus button to use the click. So for that, we would say on event, we want to have an event on what button? On the add button, right? And what event? Like I said, you can see there are lots of events, right? There's mouse over, mouse out, mouse down, key press, key down, key up, change, click. So with all these events, what event do we want to respond to? And that would be the click event. And we have a comma after that. And then we have this callback. Callback is just a function to execute. And we can just simply do that right here and just have this function with type out function with parentheses and then curly bracket. And within the curly bracket, that is where we want our entire program to go. And outside of this parentheses, we want to have a semicolon right there. So what do we want to do with this inputs? First, we have to get those inputs. We want to get these values, right, from the user. So how do we do that? First number. This is an assignment operator. And what this means is that we're taking what's on the right-hand side and we're assigning it to that variable. So remember that this is a variable, right? I hope you still remembered. Variables help us store values. So now it's more like saying, what value do we want to store in that variable? So that value we want to store in the variable has to be on the right side, and the variable name has to be on the left side. So don't flip it the other way around, where we say, and I've seen some people do this, where you have you don't want to say 5 equals to first number, right? That would be more like flipping things around. This is not what you want to do. The variable name comes first, and we're saying we are assigning what's on the right hand side to that variable. Hopefully I was able to explain that enough. So there are lots of things we can get, but in this case, we're expecting a number, right? So we want to call get, and get just means we're getting something from the user. And now notice we have get time, get text, get number, get checked, get image URL, get property, get exposition, get, and there are lots of things we can get from users, right? But in this case, all we want to get is just number. So we'll go ahead and choose the get number. But where are we getting this number from? We're getting this number from a text box, right? So we choose the ID of that text box. And notice now, this is the reason you should rename your element, the ID of your element, so it's a meaningful name, because now it's very easy for me to tell that first number goes into this first number text box, or whatever is in the first number text box goes into the first number. And let's go ahead and do the same thing for second number. So second number equal to get number, and here we want to say the second number text box. And we're done with the inputs, right? So now we have this first number, we have the second number. In fact, if we go ahead now and run our application, so I'm going to reset this again and rerun this application, notice that first number is still undefined. However, if we have 12 and I hit this button, this add button, what do you notice now? First number is now 12, right? So like I said, it's a good thing to set watchers. So let's set another one for the second number. As you could probably tell here, it's also NaN, and that's because there's nothing here, right? It's blank. And so it's saying, hey, I can't find a number right there. So once I do this again, I hit that button, notice we have second number 10 here. So this is how you get inputs from the users. However, the question we asked ourselves is, what do we intend to do with the inputs, right? So with the inputs, we want to sum those inputs together, right? So if we go ahead and say first number plus second number, that's pretty much enough. But this would not give us anything, right? There's no output anywhere. So we're not sending this to the user just yet. We've done this calculation, and indeed this calculation is correct. In fact, if we go ahead and just say console.log and we say first number plus second number, and you'll notice that this is going to work just fine. So I'm going to reset this, rerun it again, 12 and 10, and this button, notice that we have 22, right? But then your user cannot see what this output is just yet. So how do we make sure that the user sees the result of what they entered here? And that's where we now have this other thing called set. Now you probably think maybe we should use set number, right? But we're working with a label box. So for label boxes, it turns out that we want to call that set text. And we can go ahead and also try out set number. I haven't tried it before. Maybe this is a good time to also give this a shot and see what happens. But let's go ahead and just print this out first. Did I name this? So I forgot to name this output. And let's just call that output box. Oh, output label, actually. Since it's a label, let's call that output label. For this, I don't need to bother about it, and I don't have to bother about this as well. So let's go ahead and then set that text to output label. So what text do we want to set to it? This same thing right here. I'm going to cut that from there. I will put it in parentheses just so it knows that. So how does set text work? So look at this. Set text, we're passing in the ID of the element we want to set the output to, which in this case is the label box we have right here. And we want to set the value of whatever that addition or summation is. So we're doing the addition here. So this is more like saying we're setting the output label to whatever the addition is. So let's go ahead and run these. I believe that everything should be fine now. If we go ahead and do 10, and here we do 90, and we do add, now you can see 100. Right? And so that works just fine. Now, with that in place, we can just go ahead and simply copy these, just in the interest of time. I don't want to spend too much time doing these. In fact, we can actually just copy this entire thing and paste it here. I'm going to change this event, right? Because this has to do with the subtract button. So subtract button. And in case you're wondering if you might make a mistake, just allow this pop-up to do the magic for you. So we get the first number, we get the second number, but this time around we are subtracting. And let's do this as well. I'm going to get rid of this event. So for this event, it's going to be multiply button. I'm going to choose that, and I'm simply going to change this operator here. And for the divide button, I'm going to do the same thing, and I'll clear this, and we have this divide button. So, and here we also want to change what we have here. All right, so now if we go ahead, let's reset this program and let's run again. But if we try to do this, notice we have this NaN, right? Because that's more like saying we're dividing something that doesn't exist with something that doesn't exist, right? And this we can handle by just, calling a function that helps us do some sanity check if a user has entered something. We want to make sure the user enters something. But again, this video is just how do you think through solving problems like these? So let's go ahead and enter 20 here and 10 here. If I click the plus button, you notice that we have 30. If I click the minus button, subtract button, you notice that we have 10. If I click this, you notice that we have 200. And if I click this, notice that we have 2. And so now what have you done? You're done. And that's it. You did this, right? So this is how you want to think through your applications. A couple of questions you want to ask yourself to begin. Just to recap, I'm recapping now because I'm done with this application. But a recap. What are the things you want to ask yourself just when you're developing your application? What do we need the users to provide? So what do we need from the users? What must the user do in order to use this application? That's the first thing. And here we notice that the user must supply 2 inputs, right? And we came up with these 2 inputs, first number and second number. And we talked about camel case, don't forget that. And then we came to a point where we asked ourselves as well that, okay, once they've supplied these inputs, what do we want to do with those inputs, right? What do we intend to do with the inputs that the user supplied? And we said that is based on what you want the application to do, right? So if this application was doing something different, so say for instance, we want to calculate the average between this number and this number, what's the average? Then you know that we're going to do something else, right? But whatever it is, the answer to this question is usually based on what we intend for the application to do. So what we intend the application to do. And so in this case, we have 4 different buttons, right? And so for this one, we want to click that button and add that, add these 2 numbers. And we also talked about scope, right? Where we talked about, having that first number here and saying we call get number on that. And we say get first number text box, and we have the second number again, and we say equal to get number. And this is a mistake that people often make. So second number text box. If you do this, the problem with this is that these 2 lines would run immediately we hit this button run. So immediately we hit this button run, you notice that the first thing we see is NaN, right? And that's because it's getting something that doesn't exist. And so you want to make sure, so just this comment is just for you. This is a global section, if you will. So it's a global variable, actually. And that's the right word, just calling that section just so you understand what it means. But however, when we come in here and if we for instance say var output or var total, this here is a local variable. It's as a local scope. This variable has a local scope. So we can, this is called, in fact, let me actually call this global scope. So this variable total here, if we try to use the same thing here, we'll get an error, right? You can see it's telling me total hasn't been declared yet. Now, if I go ahead and say global total, so here, let's say I'm saying global total. Hopefully this makes sense. And if I try to call global total here, notice that I don't have this same kind of error or this same kind of thing. Or in fact, let's just call global total right here. And notice that I don't have this same kind of exclamation mark I have. And that's because this is visible anywhere. And that's the reason is that it's just right outside any function, any block of code. So if that's the case, if it's outside any block of code and it's just standing on its own, this is a global scope, and this is a global variable that is visible anywhere in the program. However, if we have something like this, it's only visible within this block of code. So we can use total here. We can in fact actually just say the total equal to first number plus second number, and then we output the total here. That would be another thing, another way to do it. So, but now notice it says global hasn't been declared yet. That's because I deleted it right there. All right, so in this video, what have I explained? We've talked about global scope, we've talked about the local scope, we've talked about how to think through developing your application. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you in another, I'll see you some other time when maybe we can do something else with these, maybe do some sanity check. But again, I just want to stop here, and I hope this was helpful. Thanks for your time. Bye.